An American F-35 makes an emergency landing somewhere in the Middle East. The Pentagon refuses to say exactly where. And within hours, the United States government submits one of the largest single military funding requests in modern history. $200 billion. Not over 5 years. Not over a decade. Right now. For a war that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is publicly insisting is not becoming a quagmire. So which is it? Because you don't ask for $200 billion in emergency funds for something that's under control. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happened, what it means for your gas prices, your economy, and whether this conflict, now in its 20th day, is about to fundamentally change the world you live in. Stay with me. This one matters. Let's start with the number that shocked Washington insiders who thought they had seen everything. $200 billion. According to reporting from the Associated Press, the Pentagon has submitted a request for approximately $200 billion in additional funding, specifically for the ongoing war with Iran. To put that in perspective, the entire United States defense budget for a typical year runs somewhere around $800 to $900 billion. The Pentagon just asked for roughly a quarter of that, on top of existing allocations, for a conflict that officially began less than 3 weeks ago. And here is the detail that matters. According to AP sources, the White House has not yet formally submitted this request to Congress. That means it is already running into resistance. Some lawmakers are questioning the scale, the speed, and frankly, the strategy. This is not how routine military operations get funded. This is emergency money, scramble money, the kind of funding request that gets submitted when decision makers look at their projections and realize the gap between what they budgeted and what this conflict actually costs is enormous and growing fast. So what drove them to this moment? Buried inside the live updates from multiple outlets on March 19, 2026, is a line that deserves far more attention than it received. CENTCOM issued a statement after reports that an F-35 made an emergency landing. Let that sink in for a moment. The F-35 is not a cheap aircraft. It is among the most sophisticated, most expensive fighter jets ever built. When one makes an emergency landing in an active combat zone, it is not a routine maintenance issue. And when CENTCOM feels compelled to issue a statement about it, it means the incident was significant enough that silence would raise more questions than transparency. The details of what exactly happened to that aircraft have not been fully disclosed as of this reporting. But the timing tells a story all by itself. This incident lands on the same news cycle as the $200 billion emergency funding request. It lands during a week when 6 American service members were already killed when a U.S. Air Force refueling aircraft crashed in western Iraq while supporting operations against Iran. President Trump personally attended the dignified transfer ceremony at Dover Air Force Base, according to AP reporting and photographs from that event on March 18th. American military assets are being damaged. American service members are dying. And the Pentagon is now asking for emergency funds at a scale that suggests leadership understands this conflict will not be brief. Here's the clearest picture of what is actually happening across the region right now, drawn from verified reporting. The conflict entered its 20th day on March 19, 2026. What began as U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iranian targets has escalated into what multiple analysts and outlets are now calling an energy war. Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, one of the largest natural gas reserves on the planet. Iran retaliated by striking Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial complex, which is the nerve center of global liquefied natural gas production. According to Reuters, reporting cited by Bloomberg, Iran's strikes damaged approximately 17% of Qatar's LNG output, and that damage is expected to last 3 to 5 years. Read that again. Not 3 to 5 weeks, 3 to 5 years. Qatar has confirmed publicly that 17% of its gas capacity was damaged. Egypt's president reached out to express solidarity with Qatar. The UAE was actively responding to incoming missiles and drones from Iran. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister issued a public warning that Gulf patience is not unlimited. Meanwhile, according to Al Jazeera's live death toll tracker, preliminary figures showed approximately 1,244 people killed inside Iran, at least 18 in Israel, 13 U.S. soldiers dead, and 21 killed across Gulf states. These numbers were described as preliminary and subject to change. Back in Iraq, the Pentagon targeted what it described as Iran-linked militias following the deaths of American troops. Defense Secretary Hegseth vowed publicly that the United States will finish this when speaking about fallen service members. Iran, for its part, executed a champion wrestler publicly despite warnings from the United States and international outcry, according to Fox News. Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, was described by sources as not fully in control of the regime's decision-making, a detail that, if accurate, raises serious questions about who exactly is giving the orders on the Iranian side. Now, let's talk about something that affects every single person watching this video, whether you realize it or not: the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow waterway, at its narrowest point about 21 miles wide, through which an enormous portion of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows every single day. Approximately 20% of global oil supply passes through this strait. When it is disrupted, the ripple effects are immediate and global. Iran has effectively, in the words of Bloomberg's own explainer published this week, closed the Strait of Hormuz. Not completely, not hermetically sealed, but disrupted it to the point where the global energy market is in free fall. Bloomberg's market data on March 19th showed Brent crude oil at $97.10 per barrel, up sharply. The Associated Press reported that Brent crude briefly topped $119 per barrel before pulling back. Within the same trading day, gold hit $4,720.90 per ounce, up 5.62%. These are not normal market movements. These are crisis-level swings. Bloomberg's coverage was stark. Analysts are no longer dismissing the idea that oil could hit $200 a barrel. That is not a fringe prediction anymore. That is a scenario being seriously modeled by people whose entire job is to know. Iran's blockade has left a fleet of stranded tankers in the Persian Gulf with approximately 40,000 sailors caught in a crossfire of drones and electronic warfare, according to Bloomberg's reporting. These are civilian maritime workers, not military personnel, trapped in one of the most dangerous waterways on the planet right now. The AP reported that Trump suspended the Jones Act, a U.S. shipping law, for 60 days, trying to free up domestic maritime capacity to offset disruptions. Trump is also working to ease Venezuela oil sanctions and is aiming, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, to get Iranian oil back onto the market through a process involving vessels already at sea. The White House is scrambling on multiple fronts simultaneously to try to keep oil prices from spiraling further. That tells you everything about how serious the economic pressure already is. Now here's where the human cost meets the economic reality, and you need to hear both. The S&P 500 was down, the Nasdaq was down, the Dow was down. Germany, Europe's largest economy, was openly weighing a windfall tax on energy companies profiting from the crisis. The European Central Bank held interest rates steady but explicitly warned about the costs of the Iran war. The Bank of England held rates but said it was ready to act on inflation. The Czech Central Bank said its entire policy outlook was now clouded by an energy shock. India's stock market had its worst day since June 2024. South Korea's shares dropped 8% and triggered circuit breakers, with a Korean won approaching 500 per dollar, levels that signal serious financial stress. Bond traders, according to Bloomberg, are no longer pricing in any chance of a Federal Reserve rate cut in 2026 at all. Fed Chair Jerome Powell pushed back against pressure from the Trump administration on rates while simultaneously navigating the economic uncertainty created by a war driving oil prices toward record territory. COSCO Shipping, one of the world's largest container companies, publicly warned of escalating uncertainties. The global diamond trade, an $80 billion industry, was described in Bloomberg coverage as facing an empty trading hub mirroring broader economic pain. And food. Bloomberg ran a detailed analysis of how the Iran war is disrupting global food supply chains. The Strait of Hormuz is not just about oil. Fertilizer shipments, grain shipments, agricultural supply chains, all of it flows through or near the Persian Gulf. Farmers in America, India, across Asia, they are all feeling this right now. The Associated Press ran a report on how Asia is scrambling to conserve energy as disruptions hit oil and gas supplies. They included a photograph of an elderly man in New Delhi tying a gas cylinder to a scooter, one of the most quietly devastating images to come out of this conflict so far. Back in Washington, the $200 billion request is already generating friction, and not just from Democrats. The request has not yet been formally submitted to Congress, according to AP reporting, and it is encountering resistance. Some Republicans are uncomfortable with the scale and speed of it. Joe Kent resigned from his intelligence-related position, and his resignation letter triggered accusations of anti-Semitism from Senator Mitch McConnell. This reopened a debate about internal political divisions at the worst possible time for Republican unity around this conflict. Hegseth is defending the war effort publicly, saying in a Pentagon briefing on March 19th that this is not becoming a forever war or a quagmire. But the optics are complicated. The same week he says that the Pentagon is asking for $200 billion and attending a dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base for 6 fallen service members. A former counterterrorism official told the Associated Press that he was not allowed to share concerns about the Iran war with Trump. He subsequently resigned. Trump made headlines by joking about Pearl Harbor during his meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. The comment came when he was asked whether Japan had been given advanced notice about the strike on Iran's South Pars gas field. Trump said the U.S. wanted surprise. The joke landed awkwardly given Japan's historical relationship with Pearl Harbor, though the two leaders were simultaneously set to announce a $40 billion U.S. nuclear reactor project, according to Bloomberg. The Trump administration is simultaneously asking Japan to help secure the Strait of Hormuz, a request that Bloomberg described as putting Japan in a genuine diplomatic bind, given Japan's pacifist constitutional constraints and its deep economic dependence on Gulf oil. Here is the strategic picture that multiple analysts are now converging on. This conflict has shifted into a phase that nobody, not the Pentagon, not the White House, not the Israeli government, not the markets, fully anticipated or prepared for: an energy war. When Israel struck South Pars, Iran's crown jewel of natural gas production, it was a significant escalation. Iran's response was to strike Qatar's Ras Laffan complex. Qatar is not a combatant. Qatar has tried to maintain neutrality and play a mediating role in regional conflicts. Striking Qatar's energy infrastructure was Iran sending a message that it is willing to blow up the entire Gulf's economic model rather than capitulate. Bloomberg's energy coverage said it plainly. Attacks on Qatar have made LNG's worst nightmare a reality. The global LNG market, which was already tight after the Russia-Ukraine war disrupted European energy patterns, is now facing a multi-year disruption of a major supplier. Europe, which was already scrambling to reduce Russian energy dependence, now faces additional supply constraints from the Gulf. Al Jazeera's coverage explained just how interconnected these two gas fields truly are. South Pars and Qatar's North Field are actually the same geological reservoir straddling the Iran-Qatar maritime border. When you damage infrastructure on one side, you potentially affect the entire shared reservoir's long-term productivity. And into all of this, the United States is pumping $200 billion in emergency military funding. There are several decision points that analysts across the political spectrum are flagging as determinative for where this goes. The first is the nuclear question. Multiple outlets reported this week that Trump is facing what the Associated Press described as his most difficult Iran war decision: whether to deploy U.S. troops to seize Iran's uranium stockpile. Whether the U.S. escalates to direct action on Iran's nuclear program is the single highest stakes decision of this entire conflict. The second is the ground troop question. The AP reported the U.S. is weighing sending thousands of additional troops to the region. Hegseth is denying that this is heading toward a large-scale ground commitment, but the logic of securing the Strait of Hormuz does not work from the air alone. The third is the Iran regime question. A retired U.S. general, quoted by Fox News, said flatly that neither the U.S. nor Israel will succeed in replacing the Iranian regime. If that assessment is correct, and it reflects a broad consensus in the professional military and intelligence communities, then the endgame of this conflict is not clear. You cannot bomb a country into political transformation on a timeline that matches a news cycle. The fourth is the diplomacy question. Reuters reported that Hamas was holding talks with a Trump-led board even as the Iran war strained the Gaza plan. Diplomatic channels are still open, barely, but every escalation narrows them further. The fifth is the economic breaking point question. At what point does the economic damage from 100+ oil prices create enough political pressure inside the United States to force a negotiated de-escalation? Bloomberg noted that Trump is already seeking de-escalation after Iran and Israel struck gas hubs. The economic pressure may ultimately be the most powerful de-escalation force of all. Let's come back to where we started. The F-35 emergency landing. In some ways, it is the perfect symbol for this entire moment. The most sophisticated weapon system America possesses, the pinnacle of decades of defense spending and technological development, making an emergency landing under combat conditions. In a conflict that has already cost 6 American lives in a single crash and prompted a $200 billion emergency funding request. The F-35 program itself cost more than $1 trillion over its development lifecycle, and one of them just had to make an unplanned emergency landing in a war zone. That image, a $1 trillion aircraft, an emergency landing, a $200 billion war funding request, and oil briefly at $119 a barrel, is a snapshot of exactly where America stands right now. The Pentagon's hand has been forced. The question is not whether the United States is deeply committed to this conflict. That question was answered. The question is whether the strategy matches the commitment, and whether the American public, the Congress, and the allies Washington is asking for help, Japan, the Gulf states, Europe, are prepared for what comes next. $200 billion says the answer to that question is not yet settled. Here's what we know with certainty as of today, March 19th, 2026. The war involving the United States and Israel against Iran is now in its 20th day. At least 1,444 Iranians, 18 Israelis, 13 American military personnel, and 21 people across Gulf states have been killed in preliminary figures reported by Al Jazeera. Iran has damaged 17% of Qatar's LNG capacity for up to 5 years, according to Reuters. Oil briefly hit $119 per barrel, according to the Associated Press. Gold is at historic highs. The Federal Reserve sees no path to rate cuts this year. The Pentagon has requested $200 billion in emergency war funding, according to AP. An F-35 made an emergency landing that CENTCOM felt compelled to address publicly, and 6 American service members came home to Dover in flag-draped coffins while the President of the United States stood at attention. This is not a small conflict. This is not contained, and it is not over. The $200 billion emergency is not just about funding a war. It is an acknowledgement from inside the building that plans these things that the gap between what was expected and what is actually happening is enormous. If you want to understand the world, your energy bills, your investments, your food prices, and your geopolitical future are being shaped by right now. This is it. Stay informed, stay critical, and we will keep breaking it down for you.